I would like to share a few insights on how to create a multi-brand design system for existing products. And when I put this presentation together, it was a challenge because there's so much to tell about this topic. So I think I ended up with like 60 slides and only having 20 minutes. I needed to cut a lot of things. But I thought, like, what would be the most pressing questions for me, or what were my questions when I started this project? So consider this kind of part one to get familiar with this topic. So in my talk, I would like to cover three main areas. So how to start, how to handle brand deviation, and how to structure in Figma. So as Thijs already said, I'm a freelance design system lead. I'm Kristina Grönboldt. I live in Hamburg in the north of Germany. And I'm really excited to be here. I think it's an amazing conference. And over the last years, I've built design systems for startups, large enterprise companies. And as a freelancer, I see different teams all the time. And they face the same challenges and issues in their work. So I really like to focus on the foundation part and to help them set up structures and to get them up to speed. And if you do this properly, I think it can save a lot of tears and sweat in the later process. So I'm currently working on a multi-brand design system. We cover over 10 brands for this. And we have some brands that are customer facing. They have an e-commerce part and an in-life part where you can log in and change your product. And we also have some internal brands that the company uses for their enterprise software. So when you get this task to build a multi-brand design system, it can be quite overwhelming and scary in the beginning. So I won't lie, I had so many questions in the beginning. I think I basically read everything I could find on Medium and YouTube. So as I mentioned, I'm very much into the foundation and pre-work part. So today I would like to show you a little bit of my journey on this project. So I'll cover the first weeks and months, and I would like to share like the challenges we had and how we overcome them and which are the challenges that we still need to deal with. So how do you start with this monster task? So you need to do the homework first. Sorry, you can't just jump in the design part or in the code part. You need to collect, audit, and analyze first. So our first step was we tried to collect everything we could get. All the design files, the storybook instances, the links to the apps, so that we had all the data in the beginning. And because this was a multi-brand structure, but not covered by a multi-brand system, we had a lot of agencies in the mix, third parties, internal design teams that didn't know each other. So it was kind of a challenge to get these things. And what I would do better next time in this step is I would try to be a bit more, pressing about this topic, because we really found like new files every other week. Also, we found out that there have been previous attempts on creating design systems, which actually were really like valuable resources for us. So I use this step to find allies on the way. So stakeholder management is a huge topic, and we'll cover that later. So the analysis part, you're probably very familiar with this step already when you worked on a single brand design system. You need to find the truth. So you get the design files, you have the app logins, the website, and for example, you discover the button looks different everywhere. We all know this. It's what we actually try to solve with a design system. So in my case, we had, for example, one brand that had over 20 shades of red, and no one really knew anymore what was the initial setup, because this brand was quite kind of old. There hasn't been a design relaunch for a few years now, and we really needed to dig deep to find the truth. Also with the components. So you should consider this as a part where you try to find out what is really wanted. So for the button example, for example, it could be that app and website have different buttons. However, I mean, at least the design file should cover this at some point. And we all know how this happens. There's pressure, marketing team reach out to development. They don't communicate it back. And get familiar with this step. And also try to find out who can actually decide those things. Because like you have to deal with a lot of people, and do you need to really find out like who has the last say on those things? Who can decide what is the actual button for this? Also use this to define what is a complex brand and what is a simple brand, just like from a gut feeling for this step. So based on this, we created an inventory and ran audit for tokens and components. We did this in 2 ways. So at first, we created a functional overview. We just did this in Confluence. We created a table that was accessible by everyone in this project. We had a list with all the components that we thought would be useful, the ones we found in the libraries, the ones we found in Storybook, and also what we found in wireframes and on the website. And then we just marked like, okay, this one is available. This one, we're not sure. I mean, there should be a stepper for brand B, but let's see. And also which components weren't available yet. Also, then we created a visual overview. So this is a good example for how complex this can get. We put all the sketch files first to Figma because we use this new setup to transfer the existing design files to Figma. And then we copy pasted all the buttons on one page in Figma. And then we created a kind of matrix. We had a template where designers could work in. And then we started sorting. And don't worry about naming conventions in this step. You'll get there later, you define new ones. So for instance, in this case, we had very different buttons. However, we tried to sort them by the job that they would do in the interface, and don't worry about the naming conventions. This is also a good example for a missing variant. So the orange button ended up to be our highlight button. It was only used for marketing purposes. So this is a good step to define how you would handle missing variants. In our case, we decided that all components should have all variants available all the time, because we wanted to build a future-proof product. Also, the idea of this project was that whole patterns and parts of the product are reusable. So if we left them out in this step, it would have created debt for us in the future. This step is really time-consuming, so we really spent weeks on this. And maybe you're having issues to sell this to your stakeholders. Let me share what we found useful in explaining to them. So imagine you start working on a component, like you start working on the button, and you have to open all the design files every single time, and maybe even more than one file for one brand. So this has become our main resource. Every time we started something new, we would look at that and also have this, we shared this with a lot of people in the program. So this inventory actually takes us to the next task. Brand deviation. You will use this term a lot throughout the process. So we try to find out how much brand deviation is actually needed. Therefore, we set up a series of workshops with stakeholders. So we try to invite as many people as possible to define how we would handle this. Keep in mind, this is quite an emotional step. Probably it wasn't decided by them that they now should work with a multi-brand design system. it was probably a corporate decision to save money and time. So they're afraid that they will lose freedom in their everyday work, and not only brand managers, probably also designers. So my recommendations are: be patient, be empathetic, gain their trust, and involve them heavily, communicate openly. So if you need to negotiate, try to focus on which components are really defining the brand look and feel. For example, a button is more important than a checkbox in a radio, most probably. So I brought you two examples today, the checkboxes and the radios. We found some accessibility issues here and usability issues that we would like to change. So even though you're supposed to cover existing brands in this step, try to use this step also to bring some improvements on the way. For example, we decided the checkbox wasn't meeting our accessibility standards, so we chose to have always this checkmark icon on a colored background. Also, the radios, they had some kind of like square shapes, and we also thought this should be changed. So as a result of this step, you have hopefully now a good overview. You don't need to make all these decisions right now, but at least you build a relationship with your stakeholders. So how do you then handle this brand deviation? You now have an idea what to accomplish, at least from the basic components. But let's see how you can do that. Obviously, with the power of tokens. So we already heard so much about tokens in this conference, and I think it's really the backbone of a modern design system. So I won't explain what they are again. I would like to focus on structure and semantics that we used in this project. As a first task, we focused on the structure and naming conventions. So for structure, I brought this example of colors today. So we tried to sort them into categories. Again, like we had all the colors as swatches in Figma available, and then we tried to find a structure that was able to hold all the colors in the same way. And we already knew at this step that some brands are going through a rebrand, so they would change their colors, but we didn't know like in which way. So instead of naming colors concrete like orange or green, we decided to use semantics in this already. So this was something which we discussed heavily in the team. There are design systems that do it this way, design systems that do it that way. So maybe like share in the comments how you solve this in your project. For us, it really helped us later in the process to have these generic names when we wanted to swap brands. We get to that later. So our structure is we have basically 4 main categories. The first one is the one that holds the brand colors. Those are most probably also available in the CI guidelines. We named them brand. The second category is the additional palette. Could be secondary actually, but we ended up calling this accent. So those are colors that you would use for additional elements in the interface that were maybe not even defined in the CI, could be additional colors. Third category is feedback, and the fourth is neutral. We chose to name them neutral because some had some like tones in them, and gray was a bit confusing for few. So you may have seen this a few times already. We worked with a leveled token system as a backbone of our system. If you're not familiar with this, I can recommend the documentation from Adobe Spectrum or the new material design library. They explain this really well. I'll share the links later. We have a level of 3 tokens. So we have a base level that holds all our color shades, which we ended up calling palette. Then we have an alias level for this button. For instance, it's the interaction alias that we use for multiple interactive elements throughout the whole product. And then we have the component tokens, which in this case defines the background of the button. So it's the primary background default. How do we use this then for multi-brand? We have the same basic structure for each brand. So in this case, the magic happens on the base token level. So the relationship between the alias and component stays the same, but we change the base token. So for the orange one, it's the brand 1500, and for the green one, it's the accent 1800. So different shade, different category, and it still works through the product. Let's stay a little bit longer on the color topic. So accessibility was a huge challenge for us. As mentioned, a few brands had older designs and they didn't cover the contrast ratios according to our requirements. So we wanted to find a structure that works for all brands, even though they maybe had only 3 shades in the past. So our system should account for optimization. Therefore, we came up with this systematic approach. We used a tool called Accessible Palette. There's so many cool tools out there. This one worked for us. I put the link here. And especially our front-end engineer had a really cool idea how to build a system that one color always knows like which is the color that would match accessibility if you put it on this color. If, for example, there's no token available for whatever reason. So this structure allows a predictable behavior. And without regards to whether it's a bright or dark color, it would always follow the same rules. So you can put dark text on the shades from 0 to 400 and light on the shades from 500 to 900. And for text, it's safe to use 600 to 900. So designers don't have to like test shades every single time when they're just in the flow of designing. They can just keep the system in mind and have this predictable behavior available. Another token I would like to cover is spacing. So spacing was a huge concern when I joined this project, especially for stakeholders. And as designers, we know that spacing and white space tremendously controls how a brand feels. And they were afraid that they will lose this individuality. So of course, we took it into consideration. Our component token, in this case, it's the spacing card teaser inner, it would point to a base token. So we chose to work with a generic set. And this worked for us because all the brands had an 8-point grid system anyway. And if for whatever reason, a brand would like to change that, they could just go in there and change the 2XL, for example, to 1.875 or whatever. So this is how we control spacing. And as you can see, compared to the button, we don't always have to have an alias level. This is how we defined it in our system. So you now have all your structures in place. Obviously, like we did the same for the other token families. Your development team at this point is probably really, really happy. They're probably already building the token setup, the pipelines. And I had the luxury that from day one, I could work with a front-end engineer on this. And we could plan and build this concept together from day one. However, we are at this several times already. Figma doesn't have tokens yet. So you invested all this energy in this system and you came up with really cool ideas, but shouldn't you be able to use this also in Figma? And we know it's possible. So let's find little helpers. And I would like to share a few workflow ideas that worked really well for us. So before we go into the token topic, let's take a look at structure. So we have a basic setup, which is probably a usual setup. We have a foundation, component, pattern, and then later the product. And obviously, we needed to start with one brand in the beginning. But which one do you choose? We actually had one on the roadmap. That was the first one who should launch under this new system. But if you can decide freely, like would you start with the complex one, the simple one, the functional internal one? So it was really a tough decision. So in our case, we thought it would make sense to have a safe space to start working on this. So we thought, let's have a blueprint brand to kickstart the process. It always contains the maximum amount of variations. So as explained, even though maybe one brand has only 3 variations, another one has 5, we would always cover the maximum amount. And the really cool thing is that this brand is not dependent on stakeholder feedback yet. So you have the freedom to really focus on usability, accessibility, and come up with a solution that is really perfect for your needs. We will also use this as a wireframe kit later, and we're also flexible in the process. So if there's like a really urgent need for brand A to have this specific component now covered by us, we can adapt. So then we would cover that component for that brand first and just switch the workflow. We would just then add that component later to the blueprint brand. However, we have structures that always have this maximum amount of variations idea in mind. And this way we stay very agile. So let's take a look at the tools we used. To bring the tokens to life, we used the Figma tokens plugin from Jan 6. And randomly, Jan is the next talk. I think Sylvia didn't know about this, this part of my presentation. But there are a few different approaches you can take now. We already seen a few other tools you can use for this. And you can use this plugin to control every band in the token setup. So as you can see here in the screenshot, you could put all the brands in there and use this to control the brand deviation. This is then very close to development, and you can take the full advantage of tokens. This is a complex setup. This requires education for your UI team, the ones that are the consumers of your design system. Another solution was that you work with the Figma native feature, swap library. I will also put tutorial links in the notes later. And this allows you to swap between colors, components, icons, whatever is named the same. So this is quite easy for the UI team to pick up, but it requires a lot of maintenance for your design system team, because then you have separate library files. We actually combined both because we had really high delivery pressure and our team needed some time to get familiar with the token approach. And the cool thing about this is it can grow over time. So most probably we will take a deeper look in using more tokens, and yeah, we just play around with it. So let's sum it up. Multi-brand means you have to involve dozens of people, also designers, they're also your stakeholders. So find structures that account for that are simple to understand, to find. Where's the documentation? Why do you do things in a certain way? Also keep in mind, who are your users? So find solutions that may not be perfect for you as a design system team, but maybe for the development team or the UI and UX team working later with the component. And no pressure. I mean, you don't need to find the perfect solution in the beginning. It can evolve over time, and probably like there's new tools, new plugins, new ideas in the community how you can solve this. So you don't need to have the perfect solution from day one. And finally, have fun. Multi-brand design system is a really cool journey, and I really enjoyed this project a lot. So yeah, thank you very much for having me. I hope you found some interesting insights in this talk. Let me know if you're interested in other topics about multi-brand as well, and feel free to reach out. Thank you.